Well, greetings once again to baristas. So today's question is the Rosenbergs, Martyrs for Peace? Well, that's a contentious question in the U.S. and for the average citizen thereof a non-starter. To say nothing of preposterous, I can hear it now. Why, as though it would be real, they were nothing more than red agents who passed along top secrets of weapons of mass destruction to the enemy, threatened national security, were deservedly tried and tried as traitors. While the more thoughtful liberal view is that they aided a totalitarian regime and contributed to nuclear proliferation, thereby raising the threat of nuclear war forever. Well, aside from the fact that when pro-American agents do the same thing, it's presumed they're angels, the issue of intent remains, specifically of the alleged traitors and of the alleged betraying in possession of such weapons. For instance, Hitler was highly interested in atomic technology, and though his scientists couldn't quite mix heavy water and atoms in time, there's no question he would have used the bomb if he'd had it. Combined with the V-2 rocket, he would have launched strikes against Moscow, possibly London and Washington, and kept the world in nuclear terror. For this reason, many scientists fled the Third Reich and turned their know-how over to the Allies, which then meant the USSR. This included German-born Klaus Fuchs, an early refugee from Nazi Germany, later an insider in the British atomic program and the Manhattan Project. As a communist, he saw nothing wrong with sharing Western atomic know-how with the Eastern anti-fascist ally. The information passed on by this Soviet spy ring, which included the Rosenbergs, was marginal to the Soviet atomic program, but that was essentially beside the point. Fuchs' subsequent rationale after release from prison was that he and his comrades, like the Rosenbergs, did it for peace. By today's terms, this seems mere rationalism and sheer propaganda. But it must be remembered that the U.S. did explode the first bombs without much scruple, that the U.S. was in exclusive possession of atomic war technology for some 6 years. The guiding principle was not just that atomic weapons are an endgame nightmare for humanity if in the hands of the wrong people, but that the very possession of them can turn even the right people into monsters. The temptations of absolute power being too much for human nature, it's a case of if you have it, sooner or later you will use it. And as stated, the U.S. did use it right out of the box, exactly as Hitler would have done to save German lives in his conquest of Moscow and occupation of Britain. It was the unilateral possession and use of this devastating new power that made it an ethical issue deeper than wartime and Cold War politics. The age of the superpower had begun, but was the U.S. threatening to use atomic weapons to tyrannize the world like some post-war Hitler, as Soviet propaganda would have had it? Let's see what top American policymakers said after 1945. Henry Stimson was the U.S. Secretary of War and chairman of the Interim Committee on the Atomic Bomb. I have a personal letter right here. American-Soviet relations, he wrote, may be perhaps irretrievably embittered by the way in which we approach the solution of the bomb with Russia. For if we fail to approach them now and merely continue to negotiate with them, having this weapon rather ostentatiously on our hip, their suspicions and their distrust of our purposes and motives will increase. Right-wing pundits on radio and in print were urging preemptive strikes on Russia before Uncle Joe could get his own bomb. And while Truman gloried in the United States' sole possession of the atomic bomb, he had to restrain wild men like General Douglas MacArthur from actually deploying it. One might recall that MacArthur was relieved of command of U.S. forces in Korea for advocating this very thing. Wrote MacArthur years later, I could have won the war in Korea in a maximum of 10 days. I would have dropped between 30 and 50 atomic bombs on enemy air bases and other depots strung across the neck of Manchuria. It was my plan as our amphibious forces moved south to spread behind us from the Sea of Japan to the Yellow Sea a belt of radioactive cobalt. It could have been spread from wagons, carts, trucks, and planes. For at least 60 years, there could have been no land invasion of Korea. From the north, the enemy could not have marched across that irradiated belt. The USSR had already tested its first bomb in 1949, but would not produce a second until September of 1951. So the urge, as we see, to exploit unilateral preemptive capability while it was possible to do so, to give America the global upper hand, was not just red propaganda, but a real temptation that was resisted in 1950. But it might not have been if that unilateral supremacy had continued in order to stop Moscow from developing retaliatory power and deploying it as the Korean War slogged on. Moscow's new atomic capability and Stalin's timely death had much to do with bringing said conflict to a timely close. World War III would have surely resulted if the U.S. had kept it bleeding on for a decade as it did Indochina. This was the world when Julius Rosenberg, wife Ethel, and brother-in-law David Greenglass were busted in the atomic spy ring out of Los Alamos. Now, they were Jewish, was privately held against them by much of public opinion, yet this only added to their motivation after the Holocaust showed what evil unrestricted technology could bring. To modern ears, this sounds fatuous, because atomic warfare would unleash a Holocaust to make Auschwitz look like a scout camp. And as Jews, the Rosenbergs should have known better for that very reason. But this is to apply modern hindsight to people of a different time. If the use of atomic weapons was considered acceptable by great powers and the temptation to deploy them equally irresistible, the only restraint would be a rival superpower that could do as done unto. It was the violation of this monopoly that explains, I believe, the severity of the Rosenberg sentence. The information they betrayed was not of any priority quality. The Soviets were developing their own bomb program just as well without them. But this was the era of Joe McCarthy. The U.S. establishment had lost China and Eastern Europe, as if these were America's to so lose, and Korea was a stalemate meat grinder that might lead to World War III. The stakes were prepped with fresh kindling. Fangs were out for blood, ritual scapegoats required to satisfy frustration and vindication, however vicariously. So the question remains, did the Rosenbergs help attain peace through proliferation? They would say so, however strange it sounds to modern ears. The anti-nuclear movement still considers themselves martyrs for the cause of nuclear peace, even if legally guilty of espionage. It is certain that the capability of mutually assured destruction kept the Cold War hot only in peripheral areas, where nuclear superpowers would be much less likely to directly engage, like Korea, Indochina, Afghanistan, Angola, Central America. So what relevance does this have for the post-Cold War world? Like all history, it has modern meaning as a warning, and like all history, it will be ignored by those most in need of it. The same types who cried for the blood of Julius and Ethel also crave the life fluids of Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, to haul them be a night kidnapped before a congressional tribunal to terminate their citizenship. Then off to some form of physical execution, followed by termination of their memory except as evil-hearted non-persons whose name must not be uttered without a curse or sign of the cross or some equivalent thereto. Because to baristas, autonomous whistleblowers acting in the name of truth and justice and humanity will always be traitors to that higher freedom, that higher democracy, the true security of the nation, the real will of the people, that is to power, used to doing whatever the hell its selfish elite holders need to do to keep it. Uh-oh, there's that knock on the phone. I thought it was about time for that. Let's see who's butting in this time. Hello? Fidel Castro? So you finally landed on the other side, just like hitting the beach in the good old grandma. Giving him hell over there, too, I bet. What's that? You have something to say about nuclear proliferation in marginal third world areas? This won't take 4 hours, will it? Because I haven't eaten lunch yet. Oh, okay, good. You say the Rosenbergs were warriors of peace through proliferation, just like you were, in aiming nuclear deterrence at warmongering Yankee imperialists. Wait a minute there, Commandante. You're sabotaging my whole point here. The U.S. and USSR almost did go to war in 1962 if those warheads had been pulled out of your yard. You say, so what? It would have been glorious to take out the enemy in such a spectacular victory? Hey, who's that singing in the background? Oh, you and Doug MacArthur hitting the sake and cohibas? Anyway, Trump's got his finger on the buttons in black boxes now. In this age of a single superpower again, fighting unending wars all over the globe where no place is off limits, we may get a chance to find out if you're right after all.